dollars back in people's pockets to be able to do more important things with their money in a country where the currency is devaluing significantly. I mean, Nigeria is hard. It's one of the things, I mean, I grew up in Nigeria, KC old boy, and then we moved to Canada and all this stuff. And I just never lost sight of this is where I'm from, and it'll never be okay unless the place that I'm from, eventually, if you have kids and everything, my kids can go there and say, I'm a son of the soil or a daughter of the soil, and I'm happy to be here. So we all really do owe it to the country, whether it's perfect or not. It's challenging to try. And some of us are given shoulders that can carry the load, because it's not easy to be here when you have, for some people, you have the choice to be elsewhere, and others, you don't have the choice, but we're all in it together. But, waking up every day and doing the thing in Nigeria, I think if all of us can, would anyone identify or agree with me that it's very, very hard to just be, pursuing ambition. So, but it's also our superpower, because in spite of all of the obstacles, in spite of all the things that try to knock us down as Nigerians, and I think that's probably what it means to be Nigerian for me, is just like unfiltered resilience, right? And so against the odds of not having been born in a country in which the first sound you probably heard was generator sounds. They even say a lot of Nigerian people are probably partially deaf, because we actually, the generator noise doesn't bother you. And that noise, when a lot of people visit, the thing actually disturbs them quite a bit. So you can't even hear it anymore. And watching a country go from 13 gigawatts of power when most of us were born to operating at 4 gigawatts, it just is literally, the country has gone backwards. And so trying to figure out, and so stop me whenever you want, because I haven't really planned this here for you, but taking advantage of the fact that there was you could see like 10 years ago that renewable energy technology had become bite-sized, and it could be put in any location, and it can power someone's ambition right there and there. You don't need transmission line. You don't need to move it from one place to the other. It can just power people's ambition and people's dreams where it is produced. For me, it was an epiphany. Coupled with the fact that the cost curve of storing the energy and being able to move that energy around during the daytime, the curve was dropping. But we're actually now in the steepest part of that cost curve drop, right? Like lithium prices went from, I think, thousands of dollars per kilowatt hour years ago to 500. I think they're now down to like around 100, and it's projected to keep dropping. Obviously, it'll never go to zero, but probably to about $30 a kilowatt hour. At that point, you probably won't even have people using lead batteries anymore at all. Right. And so that is a very strong tailwind, because with renewable energy, it's intermittent. You produce it, but you can't always use it when you want to. So you have to be able to store it and shift it around. So energy storage is critical to that energy transition. And the help is on the way. I can say the factories in China are pumping out. They have excess supply. I think the Chinese have had so much renewables come in, so the market is saturated over there. And so the supply, and there's a lot more suppliers that have come into the space where they had limited supply capacity before. So it has now created this price war where the battery costs are just dropping significantly. So if you're in the space, you should really take advantage of that. And that gives us a golden opportunity to be one of the first countries in the world to have solar and lithium energy batteries or other forms of energy storage in every household and in every business, powering the nation in a complementary way to the grid. And the reason I say in a complementary way is you still need base load capacity. You still need the power for industrialists and so on and so forth to do the things that they need to do to make the nation productive. But you don't need that necessarily to power a home. You don't need to build massive transmission and distribution lines if it is too expensive for the nation to undertake those projects and build power plants. A good alternative, I'm not saying it's always optimal, is to be able to do decentralized energy systems that interact with the grid. So if you have a solar system at home, you actually can program those things to take energy from NEPA when it comes, store that energy because it's cheap. You store it in your battery. When the sun is available, which is kind of free, although you have to buy the solar system, you take that one and you store it. And in that way, actually, you can do integrated resource planning. That's what you do to plan a grid. You can do it in a way that actually re-envisions a world in which decentralized renewable energy systems are working with the grid to reduce the cost of the grid infrastructure required, because they're always crying about, oh, it's too expensive to fix the grid. Well, you don't need to do everything on the grid. You can do it in a complementary way. You can have customers fund their own solar systems and have the grid power the most critical infrastructure of the nation. And in that way, you can scale up. And I've always been baffled by how much of a challenge people make this thing. Yes, people sometimes don't pay for their solar systems. People sometimes don't pay for their loans, whatever. They'll always be bad actors. People sometimes don't pay for electricity. We've heard all of those things in the country. But overwhelmingly so, if you overwhelm this problem with billions and billions of dollars worth of capital, strong processes, and just a very strong will to, look, let's end this thing in the next 5 years, you can actually do it in Nigeria. In 4 years in Egypt, 16 gigawatts of power was built, and Egypt now exports power to people around them, and so on and so forth. Siemens, my former company I worked with, did that project in 4 years. We tried to do it in Nigeria, similar projects, but the lack of systems thinking was the one thing I could not envision that would, people, actually was people. We had the capital, we had the technology, we had the template from Egypt where we said, look, we did this in 4 years. The guy signed, Al-Sisi signed a sovereign guarantee. I said, go and do. But when we came to Nigeria, we see this challenge where we just don't work together. The DISCO is not working with the GENCO. The DISCO owns the GENCO. The GENCO is saying, I'm not going to produce it. Some person in government is saying they want to reconstruct like this. NERC is not talking. You see, like, we are not a coordinated people, and therefore you need these decentralized energy systems to address this lack, the problem of the commons. Let's call it that. Nigeria's weakness, one of our weaknesses, is the problem of the commons. We're not good at it. And so what is a little bit more optimized for us are decentralized systems that cater to individual needs. And so what we are trying to do at Sunfi and a lot of other people in the space is, how do we address the capital problem? That's the major barrier to access. And we can talk about that as well today too. But how do we address the capital problem that keeps people away from making that transition finally from their generator to a solar system, and that powers their needs? But how do you also make sure that they get a solar system that actually works, or whatever kind of renewable energy system it is? Because there's so much choice in the market, it's also easy to fall prey to solutions that will not work. And all of us in the industry, quite frankly, have made the mistake of giving people the wrong thing because you yourself didn't know that someone has given you something that's not working. So there's a lot of work that we all need to do to make the transition sustainable and accessible to millions of customers. And that's our chief job at Sunfi, but we like to proliferate that gospel as well to other people. And I think you've addressed part of it in your reports as well. So happy to be here. Excited to be on the panel with Uju, and she knows a lot. Uju knows a lot about the space.
She does.
People should pick her brain. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for a fantastic opening, Rotimi. And Sunfi, I got that now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's interesting. Let me, in the interest of full disclosure, one of our values at Mosron is transparency. I must mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that Uju was one of our very earliest clients at Mosron. I think back in 2020, 2021. And so when we're putting this together, we're asking, so who are we going to call? I said, we worked with quite a number of people in different industries over the years. I said, I know somebody. And I'm so happy once you reached out to us, she said, yes, of course, I'll do this with you. Thank you so much. Uju, let me invite you to the microphone as you deliver your opening remarks in respect of policies around renewable energy in Nigeria and beyond.
Thank you so much, Tolulope, and thanks, Rotimi. That was really, really good storytelling. I really enjoyed how you sort of weave through some of the opportunities, but how it's possible to overcome some of the challenges that we know are there with willpower, with intent and clarity of purpose. It's possible. So I'm really excited for that level of optimism. Glad for what you're doing in the space. I'm glad that Tolulope brought us together today to sort of explore these topics. We're just starting, and I think there's so much opportunities to do more, using our voices sort of to shed light on these things that are really important. In terms of the policy space in Nigeria, it's been an interesting journey. I'll start by saying that lots of policies exist in Nigeria, some of them directly focused on trying to enhance renewable energy deployment, some incentives, so to speak, in one shape or form. But my key message around it is that there are lots of policies, and I think it's implementing them, executing them, following through, and the coordination around all of that that is hampering us from seeing the full value or potential of all of these policies. We've had several policies over the years or plans. There's the Renewable Energy Master Plan. I mean, there's the National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy of 2015. There was the National Energy Policy. There's the big act, the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act of 2005 that sort of helped to determine how the sector would work in terms of, okay, generation, distribution, transmission, and liberalizing the sector in the way we know it today, and all of the entire privatization process. But of recent, there's also the Electricity Act of 2023, which I think is one of the key changes that have happened most recently, because now it's empowering and helping states to be more involved across the entire value chain. So whether it's generation, distribution, and specifically renewables, and states, I think, would be the game changer, or decentralization, just like Rotimi had mentioned. We've had challenges with the national grid or centralized energy systems, and it's not been easy for renewables as well. Today, we don't have any form of modern renewables on the grid. We have mostly thermal, gas, and then hydro. But so all of the renewable energy is mostly off grid, just like Rotimi described. But states now being empowered to do more specifically, and now looking into renewables and how they can support it. Just this week alone, Lagos State government has just issued its long-awaited electricity law 2024. This builds on the electricity policy that was issued in 2021, and its off-grid energy strategy and plan, which was issued after that. But I think states are now taking a very concrete view and also very clearly spelling out what they want to do around renewable energy. So for instance, there's clear points around promoting off-grid solutions in there, promoting the adoption of clean and modern technology, and even, I think, issuing a renewable energy efficiency, demand side strategy and action plan in all of that. So when I say that we have policies, we have lots of policies, we have lots of laws, but how are they being implemented? What's the status and where are we? How have we used that compared to other countries who are sort of who have been in similar spaces and have sort of progressed? And I think for me, what I've seen in my experience is that it's been around resolving the issues that we've had around alignment. So as I said, various policies from different institutions. So there's the NERC, who is the sort of regulator on the national level. Now the states are going to have their own regulators, potentially, now that they're having their own laws. But there's also the Energy Commission. There's the Rural Electrification Agency, and there are a number of those. But I think there's a lot of overlap as well and fragmentation. So we don't have one body, so to speak. We've not that you would go to when it comes to renewable energy in the country. I would say that the Rural Electrification Agency has done quite well, and I think it was supported by the mini grid policy, which helped to sort of help for more mini grids to be developed, and I think that served as an incentive and clarity for developers to build lots of mini grids over the past years. But I think beyond that, we haven't seen the kind of unification and alignment across the sector that would help to show that, see, Nigeria is serious about this and this is what we're doing around renewables specifically. So I think one thing that would be great would be both at the federal level, but I think even now, more importantly, at the state level, is to just have a one-stop shop, so to speak, or where if I am a renewable energy developer, this is where I go to do everything relating to renewables if I want to deploy in this state, whether it's the permitting, whether it's the licensing and all of that. I know Lagos State also took a stab at trying to do this a year or two ago. I'm having an ARI help desk in the state. I'm not sure how that has worked out or if that's been implemented today or actually being run. But those are the kinds of things that if they are conceived and followed through, I think would sort of bridge some of the bottlenecks when we say when people want to come into the market. So you say, okay, what do I need to do? Where do I need to get a building permit from? I need to do my ASIA. I need to do my studies to ensure that I can build here, I can construct. What permits do I need? And everything around that. I think just having a clear process direction and just taking out this fragmentation that happens and this lack of coordination where you need to go to several organizations, depending on where, I think would be a big change, game changer. And I think that's where we should be going. By the end of the day, it's really about the willpower to get it done. And I think that's where I've seen other countries, when they've said, this is what we want to do, they focused and they've got it done. And I think Rotimi gave some really good examples, but I think there's even more. So recently in Vietnam, for instance, they've said we want to sort of work on offshore wind as one form of renewable energy. And what they're doing is working on a center of excellence that brings together all players in the sector to sort of build out that sector. So whether it's researchers, whether it's developers, whether it's the government, everyone, what do we need to build out this sector? How do we need to streamline the permitting process and things around that? And that's when you see specific subsectors developing. So I don't see why we can't do something similar in Nigeria if we want to sort of build out one certain subsector. Let's take renewables, solar, for instance. Do we want to build out manufacturing, for instance, local manufacturing of renewables in the country? What do we need to do and what kind of incentive needs to be in place to be able to build that out? Do we need a certain area where most people can come and set up for that? We already have some free zones and things like that, but what kinds of encouragement would you give organizations so that they can come and locally build out and hopefully we can start competing with other countries? I don't know how much we can compete, but is there a specific segment of that sector that we can pick and take and say we want to work on? Is there a tiny bit of even that solar panel that we can then focus on and say we want to actually manufacture locally? What does it take to do this instead of just maybe assembling and things like that? So I think it's that willpower to work out what it is we want to do in specific sectors or subsectors and then walking through everything and just resolving it, and that willpower. For me, at the end of the day, I believe that the decentralization that is ongoing is going to be the real game changer, potentially, to build out what we already have. Lots of policies already. In other countries, again, there are lots of things that people have done to ensure that there's on-grid. We talked about the grid needing to be sort of transformed. The infrastructure is old, it's not very modern, it's not as coordinated as it should be. What do we need to do to be able to have, if we wanted to put renewables on the grid, we did have a feed-in tariff regulation. To my knowledge, that hasn't been implemented. So when you have a feed-in tariff where you have sort of an incentive or certain tariff that will encourage people to come and build or deploy renewables that are connected to the grid, we've had lots of that hasn't worked, as Rotimi mentioned, and some of the plans I guess they had put on the table in the past haven't gone through. When we even talk about other businesses and individuals installing solar, for instance, at home, and if they have excess capacity and they want to sell it back to the grid, how can we do that? Other countries have put net metering regulations in place where you can, if you have excess capacity, you can sell to the grid. Maybe you're not going to be using it. And I guess that's where the storage and all of that comes into play. So there's a lot that can be done. There's auctions. If you want to have the cheapest renewables, do we want to do auctions to help to ensure that the cheapest and is coming to our grids? So I think the grid is very complicated and the willpower hasn't been there to get it to work. So I agree that decentralizing, whether it's off grid, whether it's working with businesses or now working with the states, would be a great opportunity. And building out on some of these stories that we know and that we can tell to inform the market, I think would be a great way to help to push real life stories to drive actions in terms of the policies that we want to see being implemented in the space. So there's a lot to say. There's a lot to talk about. But Tolu, I see you're back on, so I suspect that you want us to sort of move on to other things. But yeah, there's a lot. We have policies. There's an act now to guide a lot of these. But to what extent will it be implemented? And what can we do in that case, especially at the subnational level in the states, in the off-grid sector, which is still growing and which is still which is flourishing, and just require more support from us. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Uju. Absolutely brilliant submissions about the challenges, really, in terms of the policy framework and what the regulatory environment is for renewable energy use and even generation in Nigeria. We'll just go quickly into the Q&A section. So if any of our participants have questions, please put it in the chat box and I'll pick it from there. But I will start very quickly by just asking a very direct question that I want both of you to please provide perspective on. We've said these things, and honestly, all I'm hearing are challenges. Is this space, so if I'm a renewable energy business in Europe or North America, and I'm wondering, is Nigeria a viable market for me to expand my services to? Would you recommend? And they're coming to you, would you, as a consultant, to say, tell us, what does the market outlook look like? Rotimi, they're asking you as an operator in the business, what does it look like? Is there money here? Or should we just think or go to Ghana? What would you say? What's the response? Is there an opportunity for success in the renewable energy space in Nigeria today? Rotimi.
There's considerable room for success, but as with all things, choosing the right business model and executing well and staying focused and structuring the economics of your business properly in a way that you can create undisputed value for a specific set of users, and that you can replicate to that same value proposition to whether a niche of users or the mass market, or for example, commercials. So I think you have to, and then of course you have to plan for the macro, the environments. Nigeria, any model you do usually doesn't work, but in Nigeria, you have to have scenarios that are even outside of regular scenario planning. So your business structuring has to be Nigeria weatherproof. It's almost an impossible. Maybe that's the part of it that I empathize with everyone asking that question, that it's almost impossible to predict that, if you just take this line, you grow 10% per year, and things will. FX, for all of us startups, for example, that were supposed to be raising all these rounds and all this kind of stuff, FX just said no. If you think your revenue is this, because the investors, they will ask you, please, I don't understand Naira, tell me in dollars. Then you now start shrinking in the room because you don't want to say it in dollars. Because actually, sometimes when you think about it, you're like, I actually grew this business. We actually grew this business 5-10 times. But in reality, the thing hasn't gone anywhere. In the mind of a foreign investor. So there's got to be something else then that motivates you to to do business in Nigeria in the energy space, especially in the renewable energy space. There's got to be a greater ambition that drives you. And if you remember what I said at the start, right, I think it's important that some of us dedicate our lives to ending this challenge. right? There will be massive rewards unlocked for the people that can run the marathon and run the distance, but those rewards will not come till very far into the future. Think about it, tolerant, and think about the way everyone celebrates the Indomie, you know, the massive success of a company. But there's always this phrase that you hear them say, they think in terms of decades. They don't think in short terms. And the problem that a lot of us that are looking to do business in this country have is we're looking for short-term profits. And that's okay. If you want to build property, flip it, sell it, yeah, you can make good 30, 40, 50%, turn that over multiple times and keep doing that, then you should do that, right? If you want to empower people's livelihoods and their businesses using energy, energy globally is a low margin business, but it's a high volume business, right? And so I'm talking about electricity, right? Because it's typically run by utilities. We are all acting as a substitute for a traditional business model. But nobody likes to pay for electricity. Let's just all be honest. No one likes to pay for water. If they can get it for free, they'll expect you to give it for free. So because we're using technology to address this, like hardware and software and business models, it means you have to create value. And I'm also speaking to myself as I'm saying this, in a way that customers, they don't even think about it, and they actually want to keep utilizing it. So if you want to do business in the space, think long-term, have a greater ambition that's not just about money, and be able to run the marathon and then structure a good business. And I'm also giving myself that feedback as well as I'm giving it to the audience.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Uju, is there hope for us? Should they come? Those that are here, should they continue? Shut down.
No, absolutely. As Rotimi said, where there's a big problem, there's always opportunities. If 45% of Nigerians do not have electricity, then the market is still untapped and there's still opportunities to create value if you can. And I think it's really back to that point around how am I differentiating myself in the market? What is my value proposition? What's that thing that I'm coming to the market with? Am I just coming with the same thing everyone is coming with? And I think for me, the one thing I would say is potentially consider specific sectors that are needing specific solutions and combine your solar solutions potentially with productive use appliances or equipment that would help that sector. I'll just pick one, agriculture. With how big the agriculture is in Nigeria, I mean, power is required for different things, whether it's processing, milling, whatever it is. Are you able to sort of bring in your solution, whatever solar solution you're suggesting with the appliances for drying, if it's in a riverine areas for the fishermen, or women or whoever they are, is there a way to have some drying for their fishes or whatever it is? So I think to make a difference or to be able to make a difference in the market and to be able to find a space that might work for you, you really need to think about what sectors are required. Is it cold storage? I know some people do cold storage to take things across the country for people that have to deliver produce from one part of the country to the other. So I think it's really just finding that niche, that particular sector that you can serve. Of course, I think Rotimi might touch on it or has already touched on it, but the corporate players, like the banks or the bigger players, what value can you add to them? What kind of models would work for the different segments? So, okay, if it's estates, if it's businesses, if it's the bigger businesses who are sort of needing some level of large capacity. So I think it's really looking at the market, looking at who needs what, who is using the most amounts of diesel generators, and how you're going to be able to sort of be a substitute for that. But I think a big differentiator would be developing sector-specific solutions that serve certain sectors and come with appliances as well, especially for the productive segment of the sector, because I think that would change it for them. Of course, financing is always another thing, which I'm sure Rotimi will touch on, but when you're also coming with some form of financing solution. So sometimes I feel like some of the renewable energy companies are also sort of financiers as well, effectively, just because of how the market is structured. The upfront cost is usually too high. So you're sort of providing a financing solution as well. So packaging a financing solution with a specific sector solution, I think could be, there's always opportunities for that. But again, the market is big. It's 45% still need access. How can you serve them? At least or a section of that.
Fantastic, fantastic. So there's a market, you just need to be innovative at the end of the day on how to target them and make sure that you're also profitable. And it's important, one of the things that Rotimi said about having a long-term view of the market. It's the same thing in agriculture as well. You have, and I mean, people have burnt their fingers trying to run into agriculture and then cashing out in 12 months. It doesn't work that way, and burnt fingers are available to tell the story of that reality. And so, of course, investors who are looking to come into Nigeria's renewable energy space absolutely need to think long term and then provide value beyond, I'm going to give you solar, pay me now. There has to be something driving you more than that. Fantastic. Okay, so I mean, we have many questions that we had prepared, but I think it's best that we sort of make this as practical as possible. I see a question in the chat room from Ayola asking if he wants to install a solar panel in his house or a house. Are there regulations to go through? For example, if you move into a new estate and you're just building your house, you would need to pay maybe the estate association some money to connect to the power line in that estate, and you need to pay some dues. Is there anything like that around renewable energy or solar in Nigeria? That's one part of the question. Let me then ask, for the corporate side of it, I mean, a couple of years back, we saw one of the banks in Nigeria, for example, fully go off-grid, right? It made a lot of news. And first of all, at that time, I wondered, gosh, how much did this guy spend, right, to do this conversion? But what does that look like? Is this a possibility that more corporate organizations should be exploring? What's the ESG impact of this? What is the real value for going off-grid or for using renewable energy sources to power businesses in Nigeria? It's a two-part question. Rotimi, you want to go first?
Yeah, you know, if you're a commercial business, you know, 100 kilowatts to above 1 megawatt, you know, you can probably access renewable energy or at least solar energy storage. Well, let's say solar energy with some storage at rates cheaper than the grid today. So there's guys out there that will give you a 10-year contract, you know, and at a predictable rate for the next 10 years, at cheaper than the national grid today, bad day. So I don't know, the business case there is self-explanatory. It's like you can save money from the craziness of diesel and all that stuff, which is, you know, if you think about the cost of electricity, if you compare it on, you know, this, when you pay Eco Disco or NEPA or whatever the case may be, right? That unit that they charge you for. So if you use that as a basis of comparison, if you have to convert most diesel generators into that same basis of comparison, if you are paying for energy coming out of a diesel generator, then you'd probably be somewhere around 600, or, you know, some people are within the 500 to 700, 800 corridor. There's a corridor, depends on how you use the generator, right? Petrol generators, definitely, that one is 700 and above, because those things are super inefficient. And the price is taking off. By the way, the petrol price has to go towards 1,500. So everybody, if you're not prepared for it, you should just pack your bags and leave. Because the regional price for petrol is around 1,500. So because it liberated the market, it's just now economics, right? It has to approach the regional average price in Cameroon and all these different places, right? Ghana and all that stuff. So if you now compare on the same basis, the grid, the most expensive version of the grid price today is 220, right? So or something like that, the Bade price. Solar is in between those numbers. So actually, solar that comes with financing is somewhere from anywhere from 250 to 400 and something, depending on how expensive the financing is. Does that make sense? If you buy the solar system incidentally, which is what most people can't do, you can't just take your own cash and buy it now. But when you can do that, it's actually even cheaper, much cheaper than the grid. But if you get what's called a power purchase agreement or energy as a service, a lot of people can actually give it to you at a commercial scale, cheaper than the grid. So the business case should be obvious. You want to pay 700, 600 plus naira per kilowatt hour, or would you rather pay much less than that? In some cases, it's cheaper than the grid. In other cases, it's not, but it's a complementary solution anyway to the grid. It's not like you're really competing with it. So they can save, so put it as simply as possible. Nigerians will save trillions of dollars over the next few years if they switch to renewable energy. It's not all of us that will chop the trillions of dollars, but the economy will benefit significantly because every family business and so on and so forth will be saving a lot of money that they can reinvest in their businesses instead of giving it to diesel and petrol traders. I don't know.
Fantastic. And that question about are there new regulations if I want to set up solar in my house?
If you are installing, if you have like a factory and you're doing like a 1 megawatts facility, so 1 megawatt is the equivalent of 1,000 small, I better pass my neighbor 1 kVA generators. So just to make it contextualize it. So if you wanted to use that kind of power, you have to go and meet the regulator to get a license, and you pay for that license. So if you don't have, just park that. So you're not in that bucket, you're below that, so you do not need necessarily a license to operate a generator or a powered system as powering your own individual energy needs. If you try and cross the right of way of the distribution company, i.e. their transmission line, you go and try and connect into it to supply someone else. That's what Uju was talking about earlier on, that you're entering the rights of way of the disco. The states are now becoming more empowered to decide whether they are comfortable with you doing that or not. So I think what we'll see over the coming years is, wildcatting, a lot of guys buying up land, putting up some sort of power plant, whether it's gas or solar or whatever, and striking deals with the discos to allow us to connect through them to supply customers, and then the disco will take their cuts, and you'll probably see a lot of that emerge over the next few years. But for your own house, nope, just do your thing and make sure you follow your estate's guidelines. That's what I say.
Actually, Uju, I invite you very quickly, but just to comment on that, follow your estate guidelines. I saw one tweet a while back, some weeks ago now. This guy's estate refused to allow him to set up solar. He had to pay estate dues. It's only through the estate that he can access power. And that was it was quite strange for me because I want to set up solar in my house because I now bought property within an estate. The estate says, no, you can't set it up. You need to get approval from us. That was quite strange. What do you think?
Thanks. I think that's strange as well in terms of not letting you, but in terms of maybe approval, yeah, I think it might be around the installation and things like that, and maybe if it would then be connected to the estate networks in one shape or form, and maybe just them being sure that there's no funny connections. I hope that is it, but I want to believe that when estates come in, it's really around things around maybe external installations and any standards around it or anything's required. I think for some, there might be, if there's going to be structural modifications, for instance, to a building, you might need to refer to whoever provides your building permits. So whether it's the state or local government or whatever it is, ideally, not that I know that it's been executed or implemented, but just like Rotimi said, depending on the size of the system that you're looking at, if it's just your residential system, really, you don't really need any permits. If it's commercial, for commercial use or connected to the grid potentially, or tied to the distribution company's network exactly, then you'd start thinking of what approvals you need. But I think there's also concerns around maybe the types of installers putting things and standards around that. So that's another thing to be mindful of. There might be estate rules around artisans, who is doing what, who is connecting to, especially if you're then connecting to your electricity. and all of that, and they have a centralized electrical connection. So maybe that's where they'll have a concern, and they might want to use their own approved installer. But just like Rotimi said, I mean, if you're below 1 megawatt, you should be fine. But if you're going to connect to the grid, to the disco or whatever, then you should get whatever permits, licenses, or other requirements. And just as I was saying before, the states are then becoming very, very important, like Rotimi said as well. Now, I suspect that that's one of the opportunities. We're talking about opportunities. Look at states. What are they looking at? What are states asking for? Where might states even be able to provide, if you need some form of guarantees? States are putting out bids here and there in terms of power systems, now that they are potentially going to be regulating their own electricity system. So, I mean, this is for bigger players who want to play on a bigger level. So look at what states are doing. Look at the progressive states that are putting out their own regulations and laws, and see what they're asking for. I've seen bids flying around. So yeah, another opportunity in the market.
Fantastic. And like you
Sorry,
said,
so
that's really for the big
real quick,
corporation.
on that estate matter, you also just consider that, if you imagine an estate where there's 40 people living, 10 of them decide that they are going to put their own solar system in. And then the facilities manager is looking at his generator, the cost of this thing of the energy coming out of this generator has gone from 400 to 800 because less people are consuming the energy. The denominator has essentially gone down, right? So it's more expensive to him to produce that energy. So he's now making a significant loss, but he can't pass on the cost immediately to you. So you see this thing, that's the problem of the commons I was discussing. It happens at a state level, and it happens at a microcosmic level even in our own communities. Some people decide, I'm going this way. And then, so what that guy would have to do is the person would now say, okay, during these hours, there will always be generator power, and everybody, would be willing to, so he'd have to reallocate the way he provides energy to the community for that to work for him and then for every. So that may be the real thing that's going on there as well, just so that yeah.
I see that. Okay, as we go into the final round of questions, again, we have just 6 minutes more. I hope that we can close out. But final thoughts on the questions. I don't want us to leave any question in the chat room. Joy has asked, how are we using data to map out our energy demand in the country, even though we have data now that's telling us that about 45% of Nigerians have no access to electricity. I was looking at the numbers the other day, and I saw that even in urban, so in the rural areas in Nigeria, we have just 26% of Nigerians living in rural areas with access to electricity. So that takes us to about 74% of Nigerians living in rural areas not having access to electricity. And then in urban areas, there are some 81% who have access. Of course, we know because, it's maybe semi-urban area. I'm not sure what I'll classify my own as. And it's not 24 hours. So even the access we're talking about is not even 24-hour access. But in urban areas, generally, data says 81% of Nigerians living in urban areas have access to electricity. So there are gaps on both sides, whether you look at the urban, the rural areas, that has some 74% Nigerians not having access to electricity. Joy is asking, how are we using data generally to then map out and then to assess the impact of the projects ongoing in Nigeria? And then Quadri again has come back to ask, how are we driving advocacy for solar mini grid? So let's distribute that. I think that Uju should answer that question on data. And then as the operator in the market, Rotimi, you can please talk about that advocacy question and how are we trying to get more people to use the mini grids powered through solar. If you can, in 1 minute, please.
I'll go very quickly. Data is used in different forms, at least in my experience in the Nigerian power sector. I think the first would be around demand, understanding the demand. So whether it's energy demand at the household level, at the level of maybe key institutions, key businesses, but also geospatial data. So I know that the REA, Rural Electrification Agency, has done some of that, and other players, other development organizations have sort of they use some sort of satellite imagery and GIS to understand, okay, I think there was even a study of Lagos. In Lagos, for instance, I think we worked with the World Bank a while ago to understand how much renewables can we put if we want to put over all the rooftops in Lagos or something like that and things like that. So data is used, whether it's satellite imagery, whether it's geographic information, whatever it is, to understand what the potential energy demand could be and where we could potentially put resources. But also, there's also the issue around what resources, renewable energy resources are there. There's a lot of solar resource mapping being done across, the different programs, whether it's by the World Bank and others, and the different levels of irradiation across the country, whether in the north or the south. But even for wind, we try to do a little project to understand the wind capacity. Wind has been untapped in Nigeria completely, but in certain coastal areas and other areas, there's opportunity to use data to put certain devices to understand what the potential is around that, as well as other solutions. And I think the last point would be around understanding ongoing projects, like what is the impact and what's happening. And that's where you can use like remote monitoring devices to understand, okay, and we did that when I was supporting the Lagos state government as well. So to understand, to connect all of, for instance, the power systems connected to the state, the street lights, everything, to be able to see and track and understand what's happening. Or this area has an issue, something has happened here. So I think data can be used in different shapes or forms. And whether it's to understand demand, whether it's for renewable, and whether it's checking out the projects going on in Nigeria, I can see examples across border. Based on my experience, we've done that to understand what we're doing, the potential, how to make changes, but also what is the energy demand in different areas, in different locations, locality, and the potential for RE. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, mini grids, there's probably no energy space in Nigeria that has more advocacy support than mini grids. I've never seen anything like it. Dami Ogumbi, the former CEO of Rural Electrification Agency and now CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, a huge UN body, did a master class in showing the world the potential for energy access in Nigeria and showing what a little known government entity in Nigeria that nobody knew about, turning that thing into a powerhouse of an entity. It was a master class in it. And I don't think anyone has ever done that in Nigeria before. So because of that umbrella and that tailwind, literally this entity, this person has created such a tailwind. And of course, not by herself. There were tons of people around her and she has ensured that those people have been elevated globally. Even VP, former Osibanjo, I have to say, because I knew, very much gave her a ton of support and she leveraged it very well. And many people are benefiting because of it. So if you want to do mini grids, it's not, there's an application, you go put your application in. As long as you're willing to go to rural area supports, you can go on Rural Electrification Agency's websites. You can see the sites that they're saying are available, that they need help with. You put in your bid, create a strong team, consolidation, balance sheet, go after it. There's grants. World Bank said there's $750 million. Some people, it's their job to be chasing grants. Or they call it free money. So if you want to go after that and help people accordingly, because those projects, they're not commercially viable without the grants. So because there's that pot of money, just go after it. And there's also a mini grid association, development association of Africa or something. So this thing has like a lot of support. And so you can just look that up and trust me, mini grids are getting a lot of support. Yeah. Back to you, Tolu.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's sort of puts it in very good perspective, both on the mini grid side, the opportunities available, what the regulatory framework is like, and of course the opportunities. One of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is the opportunity at the subnational levels for big renewable energy companies thinking, is this a place I want to come to? Absolutely, if you have the funding, it now looks like there's a better social political atmosphere that would welcome significant financing from the big players. All right, it is my pleasure, of course, just as we draw the curtains on this conversation, to present. I'm not sure how to launch this virtually, but to present Mosron Communications white paper that we have spent a bit of time. Of course, one of the questions that someone asked me yesterday, Tolu, what are you looking for in renewable energy? I thought you said you're a public relations consultancy. Well, I said, I mean, it is about the ecosystem, really. It is not only the operators that are important in driving growth within the system, the ecosystem and the services that will support that that sector is also just as important. And so this is our attempt really to provide support to that ecosystem from a public relations and communications perspective. The white paper is available for complimentary download, and you should be getting that email in your inbox about now if you're registered for this webinar. Of course, it will then be available subsequently, and it's there on our website under www.mosroncommunications.com/resources. We like to write a lot at Mosron, just to show that, I mean, if we write for clients, we should be able to develop our own materials as well. Rotimi, Ujunwa, do you want to share any thoughts? I mean, you had advanced copies of this material. If you have any thoughts around it, do you think people should download it? Does it make any sense to you? I mean, let's have that as we close out on today's conversation. Thank you so much.
I can go first.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so let me read the tiebreaker, please. Rotimi.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that you know, obviously it breaks down a lot of the typical things that you should do from a communications perspective, PR perspective, but then I think it applied it very specifically to the, you know, renewable energy space, which is great. So it gives people a guide in terms of how they're entering the space and how to navigate the multi-stakeholder landscape that makes up this space. It's like playing three-dimensional chess, which I don't play chess, but I know that saying. So I think you laid that out very well. And in terms of, you have to manage communications on all sides. And I think the Sun King example was great, because they have to operate at a state level, you know, because they are huge, right? So they have to be aware of what's going on with policy, and people will come for them. And then you have to get down to the grassroots level. You know, there's some communities you go to who just see yellow everywhere, you know. So that comes with a lot of skill. I think being observant enough to pick out that example is great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I found it really interesting. And I thought it was really nuanced in terms of, my thought initially was bringing real life change, and bringing policy action together is a skill and is an art. But I think for me, what we can potentially use this for is the real life change that's happening on the ground can then inspire policy action in the specific areas that we want to do more. But if those stories are not out there and are not relatable, it would be hard to trigger some of the changes we're asking for and we're discussing today to break the barriers. So I really think that in terms of what the potential around this is really more around using real life changes that are happening beyond whether it's for visibility or whatever for the organizations involved. But you want to drive policy, use real storytelling and real life change to trigger that. The second thing I think was really around how we need to be observant about what works for different audiences. If you're going to be engaging government, policymakers, rural people, what languages are you going to be using? What local examples are you going to be using? I think it's a skill and it's something that that we need to learn as a sector on how to engage. You can't be coming to the rural area to explain things that are very foreign to them. You must use the practical examples of what they need. So yeah, really excited to see how we integrate more storytelling into driving policy and to strengthen really the renewable energy sector in Nigeria. And I think this is a first step, a brilliant first step, and we should really take it and do more with it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you're right. Somebody had asked in the chat about stakeholder management and how we can ensure there is policy adoption. And I just waited till this time because a good part of the white paper really speaks to stakeholder management. There are many stakeholders in power generation in Nigeria, and it is key. It's a fundamental part of the business to ensure that your business is successful, will even take off at all, that you understand the stakeholders, like Uju, for example. I hope we know that Uju is one of the stakeholders in the sector in Nigeria here. But just understanding the different stakeholders and how to approach them is definitely a way for you to win and succeed as a renewable energy business in Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, can I say thank you for your time and attention this afternoon as we draw a close to the Stories of Power webinar convened by Mosron Communications. Let me say a very big thank you to our special guests and very erudite speakers, Ujunwa, Ojemeni. Thank you so much for your expert opinion and delivery during this conversation. And then, of course, Rotimi Thomas. Thank you so much for, of course, representing Sunfire here. If you didn't, who else would do it? Thank you so much for your insights and input. It's been a very short, succinct, and very exciting conversation. Please drop your feedback for us. I mean, we're a PR company. Feedback, if we don't get your feedback, I mean, it just feels like we dropped a ball in the ocean and there's no splash. So please tell us your thoughts about the webinar. We can post about it using the hashtag Stories of Power. We share a link in the chat box where you can get the material. It's available for complimentary download. Please encourage your friends in the sector to read it. And even as an individual consumer of renewable energy products, you can also read it just to understand what's happening in the sector. Thank you all so much for your time and attention this afternoon. Please have a very wonderful day ahead. Bye now.